This is AdTechGod, and this is a commercial message. With Harmony Direct, Innovid has streamlined the supply path to its purest form by removing all friction points, including technology hops, fees, and energy waste. Released as part of its Harmony initiative, which aims to solve the biggest challenges facing CTV advertising today, Harmony Direct is already being used by agencies and publishers today. Find out how you can put more dollars towards working media, improve fill rates, and take the greener path. Visit innovid.com/harmony. Again, go to innovid.com/harmony. This is a disclosure. Please note that all guests featured on the AdTechGod pod are invited to participate. They do not pay in any form to appear on the show. However, guests may be sponsors of the AdTechGod community, the AdTech forum, or other product offerings. Welcome to the AdTechGod pod, your window into the world of advertising technology and the people behind it. I'm your host, AdTechGod. Welcome back to another episode of the AdTechGod pod, the podcast where we meet the people behind streaming television. I'm your host, AdTechGod. Today we have a special guest who's worked at some heavy-hitting companies in the space. Miles Fisher, Senior Director, Emerging and Programmatic Sales at Roku, is with us today. Miles has been with Roku for a year and a half and has spent time at notable companies in the advertising technology space. Starting his career as an account manager at MediaMath, he progressed to a role at Google, where he concentrated on their marketing platform with a particular focus on the data and telco vertical. He eventually moved to a telco, leading on sales and strategy at T-Mobile. Miles has been a positive face to Roku, often taking parts in panels and speaking engagements. We have interacted online, and I'm really excited about hearing about his journey and how he landed at Roku. Miles, I'm excited to have you here. Welcome to the AdTechGod pod.
Thanks, ATG. Great to be here.
I'm super excited to have you here too, Miles. I'm a huge fan of yours. We've obviously interacted a lot online. I've heard you speak, and I love your perspective on the industry.
Thank you. Appreciate that, and a fan of yours, as you know already.
Awesome. I love your background. You've really worked at some very big companies I respect a lot. I want to hear about your journey and how you got into this industry.
Yeah. So MediaMath was my first job. And I think I'm one of the only people who can say they've worked, or their first job was at a DSP or an ad tech. And it was early MediaMath. I think it was something like the 50th or 70th employee. And I came in, my manager at the time asked me a question, said, "Do you understand how the internet worked?" And I think that was maybe one of the most impactful conversations I had in my career. And, he whiteboarded ad calls and tags and pixels. And, MediaMath at the time was still some of the smartest and best friends that I've worked with in the industry. I think a lot of people know that story, and you've covered it on the pod. And from there, went over to Google, and it was shortly after they had bought Invite Media. So again, good timing, building up a team of, traders, or they didn't even call them traders at the time, but I think they called them digital media managers. And then, Google didn't really, lean into the DSP business right away. Obviously, search and YouTube were really large businesses. So one of the things at Google that I think I've taken with me the most in my career, working on the DoubleClick business as it, was DBM at the time, was this idea of, collaborating, gaining consensus, not necessarily always being, the 1A type of seller and not owning a client relationship. And from there, had a few different jobs on a few different verticals, worked across a couple of different agencies, and ended up landing on telecom, trying to sell Google's DSP at the time to Verizon and AT&T shortly after they had made the acquisitions of what became Xandr and what became Oath. So they didn't want to buy ad tech. And the only telco at the time who wasn't in the ad tech space was T-Mobile. And I got an offer to go over there with a couple of folks from Google, which ultimately led me to my role now at Roku, which, you said is a year and a half in and feels like it's flown by. So I don't know if that was what you were looking for, but kind of have hopped across a few different places, as you can tell.
I think your career path is pretty straight. I mean, you worked at MediaMath, cut your teeth on the industry, moved into Google, Google has an incredible reputation for spinning out entrepreneurs. Like, it's pretty incredible how many people worked at Google for, 4 or 5 years. They turn around and understand the technology and the landscape really well. Is there anyone in particular that you worked with at that time that you feel has really impacted the industry positively because of possibly the experience at Google?
I'm trying to think if there's anybody that I worked with closely that, spun out and started a company. And the Google network is amazing. Like they have a whole group called Zoogler for ex-Googlers. And, just talking to some of those people and what they're doing is always remarkable. There's a group from MediaMath who have done some cool stuff and have started some businesses that are doing well. And, the thing that I always do is root for them and help them however I can.
Amazing. And at your time at Roku now, your title's, emerging in programmatic sales, but what exactly are you focusing on at Roku today?
My scope is kind of twofold. Our emerging business is really anything outside of the Ad Age 250. So we work with performance agencies, independent agencies, and really brands that are trying to kind of do some sort of down funnel or performance goal and maybe smaller D2C type. And we work with those groups across any activation channel, whether that's a direct IO or programmatic. But then the other half of my scope is leading sales for our programmatic business. So working with advertisers of all sizes, inclusive of the Ad Age 250, inclusive of our large holding company partners, and really working with them to help them understand the best of Roku programmatically, whether that's our inventory, our data, our ad platform. So it's nice because I get to work with a lot of horizontal teams at Roku and continue to work with kind of agencies of all sizes on the client side.
What do you think is maybe in your current role or past role, some of the biggest challenges you've had to face in your role as a sales leader, really?
Yeah, I think the past 2 years have really tested a lot of sales leaders, right? I think as ad tech has risen, so did the economy. If you kind of looked at those two graphs side by side, I'm sure there's a Lumascape somewhere or aside from a Lumadeck that talks about the hyper growth that the industry has had, the general digital economy and ad tech. Like they've all kind of taken off together. And when you think about, really the past 2 years, I'd like to not pontificate about a future market, as a lot of people do in our industry. I'll never say if dollars are going to go up or down in the future, but we know for sure the past 2 years have been softer, right? And the whole industry has felt that. And I think in ad tech, whether you're on the media sales side and dollars get studied harder for their ROI and you need to prove performance, or you're on the vendor side in some capacity and you're working on a platform fee model or a SaaS model, every dollar counts. So everything gets questioned. So if you're a smaller startup that's new to the space, you really have to prove how you're saving money or time. And sometimes that doesn't even work because you got to expect a client to put their neck out to try a new product. So as a sales leader, it's keeping the team motivated, not getting beaten up. Like when dollars come out of market, it doesn't necessarily always reflect that seller's not doing a good job or hasn't educated the client or hasn't spent enough time with them. Just the reality of the business and the macro environment at the time.
The last 2 years have been interesting. We saw such a massive boom in the space in 2020, 2021. And really like 2022, 23 is softer for many. I read some stats the other day that said that we are expecting 7.7% increase this year, reaching 1.6 trillion in spend for global advertising, which I think was great. But I think the saving grace is truly the fact that we have so many tentpole events. Like we have Super Bowl, Summer Olympics, US political elections. So like there's a ton of money flooding into the market this year, but I think if it wasn't for that, we'd be looking at a pretty flat year overall.
Yeah, and then the double click into that is where is dollars coming out and where are dollars getting reinvested. Retail media, streaming, obviously the two things that come to mind the most. Those two are on a collision course together, and that's something that's super exciting for us and some of the partnerships we've done in the retail media space. So I think when you unpack that, there's areas that are lagging, linear continues to decline, and streaming continues to grow.
Where do you see things heading in the next 12 to 18 months? What trends are you seeing are hot?
Yeah, I think thinking about TV and streaming specifically as a performance channel is something that's top of mind, right? And I think that's a great opportunity, but it's something that I think we're also wary of, right? Like TV has been the best proven reach and brand awareness vehicle of all time, right? Like dating back to Mad Men days and having really impactful creative and getting in the biggest screen in the home. And TV continues to do that. But in an environment where every dollar counts, and now you have capabilities on streaming that look more and more digital every day, whether that's audience targeting, interactivity, we're doing a lot around shoppable and partnerships with Shopify and Walmart. So when we think about what excites us, we think of proving TV as a performance channel, looking at ROAS, looking at incrementality. And, how does it start to look almost more like social, where you are point of purchase or converting a purchase is something that, we're constantly thinking about.
So just general question, because I don't know. How are you converting people from watching an ad on a screen to potentially purchasing a product?
Yeah, so at Roku, we're in 80 million homes at this point, and 1 out of every 2 CTV impressions are actually served on a Roku OS. And when somebody signs up on a Roku, email, phone number, credit card, right? Because they're going to buy, a new episode on Amazon Prime or, purchase, like upgrade a Hulu account, right? So we have a logged in user and we also have a remote control. So one of the things that's really unique to the Roku experience is instead of expecting someone to take their phone out, scan a QR code, which is not normal human behavior, we actually, because we have a logged in user experience, we've built a bunch of interactivity where we can do pop-ups, pop-outs, expandable stuff where you can use your remote to send yourself an email, an SMS text, or in some instances, actually check out directly on a Walmart user experience or a Shopify user experience if a product is sold on a Shopify or Walmart.com.
Okay, that's great. I like the QR code feature, but it's not the most convenient. User experience isn't the best, but I am a fan of it, and I have bought stuff using a QR code. I have to.
What'd you buy using a QR code? If I can ask you,
vitamins.
Vitamins. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, because I haven't purchased anything with the QR code. I've done the remote, maybe a little bit as a test dummy. We find that products that in like the $35 to $75 price range, not too much SKU variation, like people will make purchases. And we think that TV will continue to look more shoppable, especially with some of the branded integrations we're working on over time.
I want to say it was like a random Flintstones vitamin. Like I saw it. I liked it. I think my kids were there. They're like, oh, that looks cool. I said, no problem. And I scanned it, ordered it, directed me to Amazon, and I purchased it. And it was at my house like the next day.
The fulfillment angle is very cool.
Yeah, I thought it was a good experience. It was quick. I don't think I've purchased anything since. I don't necessarily think I've seen anything that was as the right price point, if that makes sense. Like I'm not going to use it for a cruise line for $7,000. Like I'm going to spend some time and research it. But for small items, $20-$30, there's no problem. So I've asked you your journey. I've asked you some of your challenges. What would you say is like your biggest milestone? Like in 3 places you've worked, all big companies. What do you feel was the game changer for you?
Yeah, I think my last gig at T-Mobile was kind of the game changer that got me this opportunity at Roku. I would say being at Roku has been an incredibly fun journey. The pace of innovation at Roku, the nexus of all of streaming, which is really the nexus of advertising right now, just everything happening, regardless of what app, right? Our president says we're not in the streaming wars. The streaming wars are being fought on our turf. So just being in a role that is so important to how, CTV and streaming is evolving. But I think what got me to this opportunity was the role at T-Mobile, right? That really felt, I talk a lot about entrepreneurship, influencing people at big companies, particularly companies that advertising isn't the core business, is incredibly hard, right? And if you can influence internally, right, and influencing clients, and externally is also super important, but internal influence, building trust, right, and getting people to see things the way that you see things, whether that's through memos, PowerPoints, like whatever your mechanism is. But at T-Mobile, we started, it was a small team of 3 or 5 of us. We grew that business to a large team and a non-trivial amount of revenue. And it took a lot of educating, right? And it's hard to move big companies forward because generally companies are risk averse, right? The higher up you go in a company, the less risk averse an individual is. And often, one of the downfalls of big companies is that people start to think for themselves and fiefdoms kind of pop up versus thinking for a business. And when you are, the non-core business like advertising was, it becomes really hard to get people to take a chance or really hard to let go of this if it's going to be better, coupled over here, right? So to me, learning how to do that and having that experience and then kind of the people that I met along the way at DSPs and SSPs really, really kind of set me up for this role that I had at Roku.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible how any role you're in, just the amount of knowledge you gain and experience you gain is just like incredibly valuable. But the network is incredibly important. So the fact that you've worked with DSPs, SSPs, working at a telco, that is extremely valuable in markets. So I totally understand why Roku would pick you up. So I'm going to move into the next part. Miles, this is new. And so I gave you an option to select a couple of questions from 13 total questions. We're going to start with the first one. Why do you love ad tech?
I think the easy answer is the people, and I think that's obvious. But I do think that the opportunity to educate in an industry that is extremely asymmetric sometimes with knowledge and information, I think is something that we all need to hold ourselves accountable to make the industry better, right? So that's a little bit of a long-winded way of saying that like this thing is overly complex. And if we can make it easier for customers, we will all be better. So that's something that I try to do all the time is just simplify things. And I tell my team that all the time, just make it simple. We all get so bogged down in just different parts of the ecosystem versus just saying what it's going to do for a customer. So I think the more that we can solve problems versus making things more complicated, that's what excites me about ad tech.
Yeah, I think the consultative piece of it too is super important. I agree with you. But also like knowing your audience. I'm sure you sit down in a room with people that are extremely technical. You need to kind of roll up your sleeves and get dirty and talk about the real tech behind the product. There are others that aren't. They just want to do what they need to do. And as long as the features and functions of the product do it, then you've basically got a deal.
And the good news is at this point, I don't even get invited to the technical rooms. I'm just there to hang out and, talk to the people who want to buy the product, not build it.
That's what I need. I'm joining you over there at Roku. The next question I have is, when will AI truly become a game changer?
It wouldn't be an ad tech podcast unless AI came up. So we made it, I guess, 20 or so minutes in. So look, I think the one thing about AI, and most people in ad tech probably, are starting to put it in, but it's been in a lot of the advertising products that we've been using, right? And I think Meta and Google have been doing it well, despite all the bad press around Google and their standalone AI products. Like the reason that YouTube ads are so good and Meta ads or Instagram ads are so good is that's AI, right? I think as far as in streaming, where the opportunity will be there is the ability to make creative at a faster clip in a higher res. One of the constraints on streaming today, or really on TV that's different than other channels like social, is people aren't afraid to make a clip, throw some text on it and call it an ad on Instagram. That doesn't really fly on the big screen. There's a level of quality that people expect when they're watching, a 30-minute episodes and there's a 3-minute break. I think AI has an opportunity to really change the game on the creative side of streaming and, the iterations, the volume of creative testing, right? If you think about the way that big advertisers make TV spots today, one of the reasons that you see so many of them for some of these big telecom or CPG brands is they'll get a celebrity, they'll shoot 5 versions, and they think 5 versions is a lot. I think with AI, if you can start to think about creative on TV, the way that we think about creative on digital, where you're doing different colors in the background, different text, different offers, and you can do that on a high enough res and do it at a fast enough volume, that I think is the promise of AI. I don't think, or from what, folks a lot smarter than me, I think we're still at least a few years away from that on television. But I think there's a bunch of companies in the space that are doing text to video that will enable that.
There is. I think OpenAI's new product is called Sonos. I think that does that. So you can type in prompts, you can describe the video scene, and then it'll actually spit out a video. So I think we'll eventually get there. Do you think that AI in particular has a large role outside of just creative, or do you think creative is really going to be like the big hit for our industry?
I think it'll be around optimization and measurement and, anything that has large data sets, right? Like that's its core competency. And I'm sure, the biggest measurement companies, the biggest, the companies that are operating DSPs and SSPs, and there's algorithms doing optimization. I'm sure there are teams that are doing that in some capacity. But I think, when I think a lot of consumers talk about AI, they don't necessarily know what it looks like or that they're already using it. So I think if we were to figure out, what is going to be the consumer facing angle, particularly in streaming, I think it's creative optimization and I guess the barrier to entry for streaming television, the way that search and social are so cheap that anybody can make an ad, could be a future unlock of streaming.
Yeah, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine talking about AI in ad tech, and he had mentioned, I don't know why everybody is so big on the algorithm piece of AI. We've all been doing this anyway. We just didn't necessarily label it AI. On the creative part, it's, relatively new, like spitting out new creative, customizing the creatives, all automated. But in terms of the actual usage of AI in programmatic, they're like, we've basically been doing this for a few years at this point. But it's just now kind of catching traction to where this AI term is being used everywhere.
Yeah. I mean, look, you know our industry, people will grasp onto a buzzword until there's a new buzzword.
Okay, well, what do you think is, and this wasn't even planned on this one, Miles, what do you think could be the next buzzword outside of AI?
Oh man, well, that's a tough one. I mean, the buzzwords that we're hearing, and I don't know if they're necessarily buzzy, like, everyone says the year of mobile, the year of streaming, retail media, AI. I think those are the biggest buzzwords. I think the thing that we're hearing more, and I mentioned it earlier, was performance, but within that, even incrementality. And there's some great companies that are doing incrementality right now. But, the theme of the next couple of years, I think, in our space is going to just be back to performance. And I think you had Google and Facebook spending years and years convincing the industry that performance mattered the most, right? And last click attribution was the most important thing in the world. And now, fast forward, obviously people are still talking about cookies going away or cookies have been gone. Depends who you ask and what your strategies are. But, when you think about incrementality, it's going to go back to things like mixed media modeling, holdout groups, and all of it will just be performance. So that's a long-winded way of saying about the buzzwords, but I think the overarching theme that you're going to continue to see for the next couple of years is performance across all channels and accountability for marketers.
So Miles, even though we are recording this in advance, the upfronts would have just been completed. What are some predictions you have for the upfronts this year?
Oh man, put me on the spot. And, when this airs, I'll either be right or wrong. So I always try to never make predictions for this exact reason. But I think the one thing I do know for sure, right, or I'd be shocked, these are going to be the most programmatic upfronts we've ever had. And I think, historically, I think they've said that for a few years, but I think we are really at an inflection point on the industry, particularly us at Roku, the amount of first-party data that we're sitting on, the partnerships we've done with our clean room partner like Snowflake, and the relationships we now have with our ad tech partners across the industry on the SSP and the DSP side. We just see so much value, or our customers are seeing so much value in measuring reach and frequency via programmatic, as well as, what I continue to say is that performance and incrementality. And I think the other part of it is, for the first time, a lens of commerce, right? I don't know how much of the upfronts will be directly tied to retail media, but I do know a lot of the upfronts that are committed will have some sort of retail targeting in some capacity when they run, the next broadcast year. So I think as we're going into it, those are two predictions that I'll make is, programmatic and performance, which, are a little biased because that's my main scope and remit. But I truly think that's how the upfront will continue to change, and this level of accountability that maybe hasn't been there before.
Hey, Miles, I'm the god of programmatic prophecy, so I don't think you're wrong. But let's see. Let's see what happens.
I appreciate that. You can just edit this if I am.
Yeah, exactly. I'll just cut it out. I'll to completely remove it. Miles, thank you for being here again. I really appreciate you, and thank you to Roku for having you here on this pod.
Thank you, God.
Speak soon.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the AdTechGod Pod, a podcast for the people, about the people that make ad tech great. Stay connected with me for more insights, trends, and interviews in the realm of ad tech. Don't miss out on our latest updates, so follow me on X, Instagram, and connect with me on LinkedIn. Don't forget, ATG Slack community has insights, networking opportunities, and jobs. Keep the conversation going and stay at the forefront of ad tech innovation.